Hi, I'm Amy Bingham from Abide in Torah. And in my last video, I told you about the first major change that the Father made in my walk with Him. And it came from the question, what is sin? And when I learned in First John 3, chapter 4, that sin is lawlessness, it made quite an impact on me. The second major change comes from a passage in the book of John, the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 15. Now, first, let me start by saying that this book, prior to this major change in our life, was probably my favorite book of the Bible. At first, I had a hard time with the disciple John because I didn't really understand how he could call himself the disciple that Jesus loved. I mean, it seemed so arrogant and so prideful to call himself the one that Jesus loved. I mean, who says something like that? And then as I went on in my walk with the Father and He began changing me and healing broken places and binding up wounded places and molding me more into the image of His Son, I began to understand how John could say that, because as the Father poured His unending, everlasting, eternal, enormous love into my life, I began to understand how John could call himself the one that Jesus loved. And so, in this book of John, probably chapters 10 through, 15 or 16 are probably my favorite chapters out of that book. And so, needless to say, I've probably read these chapters more than any other chapters in the Bible because they were my favorites. And yet, somehow, I had missed this passage. Or maybe it was that the Father hadn't let me see it the way I did this day. So, nestled right in the middle of John chapter 14, verse 15, was this little nugget. If you love me, keep my commandments. These were the words of Jesus spoken to his disciples. If you love me, keep my commandments. The day that I read those verses for what seemed like the first time, I sat in front of my computer and just cried because I was completely overwhelmed. I was excited at the same time because I had a lot to be thankful for. I had a lot of reasons to be grateful because I had changed so much. As the Father had led me along in my journey with Him, I had grown so much, and I would tell the Father, thank you for what you've done for me. I'm so grateful for the changes you've made in me. I'm so grateful for the way that you've healed me, for the blessings that you've poured out in my life, for all that you've done for me. But it always kind of seemed like it wasn't enough. Don't get me wrong. It's not that I thought the Father didn't appreciate my thanks. That really is not what I mean. I'm sure He's glad when we say thankful, when we acknowledge that He's done something wonderful for us. But for the first time in my life, I had a real, tangible way of being able to tell the Father, thank you, and how much I loved Him. And it was this nugget in John 14, verse 15. If you love me, keep my commandments. What Jesus was saying is that if I wanted to express my love to Him, my gratitude, my thanks, my appreciation, all I had to do was keep His commandments. I had a way I could finally do it, and I was overjoyed. And so, when people say to me that the law is burdensome or it's bondage, or why would you go back to doing those old things? I want you to understand it's not old for me. It's not bondage, and this is not a burden to me. This is not something I have to do. Keeping the Father's commandments is not something I have to do. This is something I get to do. I get to do these things because I choose to. I can obey His commandments, and in doing so, express my love for him. These words were a treasure and a joy to me. And so I wanted to share that with you today.